guys, and welcome back to more Amonkhet spoilers. I'm Seiben here for the Aether Hub, and today we'll be taking a look at some of my favorite drops from yesterday's batch of new cards. Let's start with some strong black removal and Lay Bare the Heart. Sorcery for 1 generic and a swamp, target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-legendary non-land card from it, and that player discards that card. So this card's fairly similar to cards like Distress and Thoughtseize, but with slight differences from both. While Distress costs another solid black to play, it isn't restricted to non-legendaries, and of course Thoughtseize is just amazing at half the price. It's interesting to see that one of the first removals spoiled for Amonkhet actually does nothing against the 5 indestructible gods we know are coming in the set. The gods are of course legendary creatures. To Lay Bare the Heart ain't gonna do nothing to them. Looks like we'll have to rely on good old-fashioned exile effects to show up. Outside of the god cards, this is a fairly nice form of uncommon removal. You'll usually always be able to hit something with it. Good or bad, at least it's cheap. It can be used to snipe out some important combo pieces in standard like Felidar Guardian, but I think it'll really shine in limited. Almost every time you play this card, you'll get at least some value in a draft. Another good form of removal, at least for limited, is Splendid Agony. Instant for 2 generic and a swamp, distribute 2 -1/-1 counters among 1 or 2 creatures. So for 3 mana you can either weaken 2 things, kill off a 2 toughness creature, or ping 2 1 toughness weenies. Pretty nice flexibility for a single card, but of course there is another option, adding those -1/-1 counters onto your own creatures. Why do that, you ask? We'll get into that in a moment. But yeah, Splendid Agony, a decent removal card for limited play. Probably not the best you can find, but certainly not useless. And maybe, just maybe, a negative counter deck can exist in standard with Nest of Scarabs. We'll just have to wait and see, but these next couple cards kinda support the idea. Consuming Fervor is an enchantment aura for a single red. Enchanted creature gets +3/+3 and has, at the beginning of your upkeep, put a -1/-1 counter on this creature. This is a pretty strong aggro card with a very simple philosophy. Bash and kill your opponent before you stack up too many wither counters. But of course you have the whole sub-theme of negative counters happening in Amonkhet, so that could be a totally different deck altogether. As you need negative counters to activate other cards, some I'll show later in this video, a card like this could be crucial in getting a steady supply while also straight buffing your board on the cheap. Of course, you could always use this in the traditional way, or put it on an opponent's creature that can't attack, maybe a god for example, and just hope and pray they become weak or die from the spell before they kill you with it. Remember, every tick on a creature means you could potentially get another 1/1 Scarab from Nest of Scarabs. Next on the negative counter bandwagon is Exemplar of Strength, a 4/4 human warrior for 1 generic and a single forest. Sounds too good to be true, right? Well, hold up a minute. When it enters the battlefield, put 3 -1/-1 counters on a target creature you control. Whenever Exemplar of Strength attacks, remove a -1/-1 counter from it, and if you do, you gain a life. There's a number of ways this card could be played. You could either play it as a 4/4 for 2 and put the weight of the negative counters on another creature, maybe just killing it if it isn't doing much. This is like my ideal way of playing Exemplar of Strength, the limited way to play it. Killing off something weak to get yourself a stompy 4/4 on the cheap. But of course the negative counters play exists as well, giving them to Exemplar of Strength itself, making it a 1/1 but getting 3 1/1 Scarabs from that handy enchantment. You also get the benefit from the life gain as you remove the counters and get stronger. It may be slower, but it could be the optimal use of this card. The final card of the negative counter brigade is Channeler Initiate, a 3/4 human druid for 1 generic and a single forest. When it enters the battlefield, again you put 3 -1/-1 counters on a creature you control. Tap Channeler Initiate, remove a -1/-1 counter from it, and add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Again, we see a strong card priced very aggressively with an ability to remove its own negative counters for a positive effect. This time it becomes a 0/1, but every time you tap it, you get a mana and it gets stronger. This is very similar to the card Servant of the Conduit from Kaladesh, but instead of energy, you're dealing with negative counters. When you put these types of cards together, you really start to see something happening. You can interchange the counters between Chandler Initiate and Exemplar of Strength, ideally giving all the counters to the Chandler, so as long as it doesn't die, it'll keep giving you more mana while the Exemplar comes in as a 4/4. If you're also running black, you'll get a buttload of Scarabs, but red may be an option as well if you're planning on just going stompy. Not sure if it's gonna be good enough for standard, but I know I'll be at least trying it, playing around with either a stompy green deck or black-green counter deck. Out of that mechanic, we step into another, Exert, this time on Tah-Crop Elite, a 2/2 flying bird warrior for 3 generic and a single plains. You may exert Tah-Crop Elite as it attacks. When you do, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Of course, exerting it means it won't untap during your next untap phase. So this is an evasive creature with a temporary glorious anthem effect attached to it, and honestly that's pretty nice for a common. Of course, a 2/2 flyer for 4 isn't anything to write home about, but the ability to buff your entire board while swinging in with a 3/3 is pretty sweet. At least for that one turn anyway. Exert does have a drawback for being so great, and it pins this card down for a turn, making it useless, meaning you'll have to choose the right moment when you want to exert. Normally I'd say this is a little weak for a standard deck, but I don't know. People are already thinking about using Always Watching with Exert cards. Having this effect along with it could prove powerful. As for limited, it's a nice evasive creature with an optional bonus, so it's decent. Cast Out, enchantment for 3 generic and a single plains. Flash. When Cast Out enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Cast Out leaves the battlefield. It also has cycling for a single plains. Another version of Stasis Snare, kinda. You get an added cost for the added flexibility of having cycling. Usually on removal like this, I wouldn't want to cycle it no matter what, but hey, maybe in a control mirror match an extra draw would serve you better. At least we finally get a new way to deal with gods from Amonkhet itself. But at 4 mana it's certainly not the best. For limited however, this is primo removal, always gonna be a top pick in my books. Oh, and I have to say, cast me outside, how about that? Floodwaters. Now here's a true cycle card I'd actually prefer to cycle. Sorcery for a whopping 4 generic and double islands. Return up to 2 creatures to their owner's hands. Cycling for 2 generic. This card's scarily close to Essence Fracture from Onslaught. Trade a mana from the spell and add it to the cycling. It's not good. I mean, it's super expensive, and while bouncing 2 creatures can be strong, you can't really justify the cost. This would most likely be used as late game removal in limited, or as just a cycling stick. That's about it. Next we have Scribe of the Mindful, a 2/2 human cleric for 2 generic and an island. Pay 1 generic, tap and sacrifice her, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. A worse version of Archaeomancer, Scribe of the Mindful, as its name would suggest, can help her god, Kefna the Mindful. You can use her sort of like a combat trick, sacking her and getting that 1 extra card into your hand to meet the 7 needed to attack or block with Kefna. Besides that, she could be included in some slow control decks that really need some extra spells, but yeah, don't expect much from it. It's also kinda slow and situational for limited. And here we have yet another questionable blue control spell in Decision Paralysis. Instant for 3 generic and an island, tap up to 2 target creatures. They don't untap during their controller's next untap step. A straight up worse version of Sudden Storm. Could be decent control in limited, maybe, but other than that it's just more the same. Cards like this hardly ever see play, and why would they, when there's way better, more permanent removal out there? Really could have used cycling or anything to have it match Sudden Storm's Scry 1, but no luck. Next we're looking at a couple new Aftermath cards, starting with Onward to Victory. Onward being an instant for 2 generic and a mountain that gives target creature +X+0 until end of turn, where X is its power. And Victory being played from the graveyard as a sorcery, target creature gains double strike until end of turn. Our first Boros colored Aftermath card, I feel like it's just designed specifically for aggro players. I mean, both of its effects essentially doubles a creature's power. The only issue I have is there's no added trample, so unless you're getting through or have trample already, a simple token can soak up the damage of both Onward and Victory. No, I see this more being used with Fling, which is getting a reprint in Amonkhet. Double a creature's attack and just pelt the opponent with it, and you can save the victory effect for another creature down the line. Then we have the Selesnyan Aftermath card, Prepare to Fight. Prepared being an instant for 1 generic and a plains. Untap target creature, it gains +2/+2 and has lifelink until end of turn, while fight is, well, fight. For 3 generic and a forest, target creature you control fights target creature an opponent controls. So initially I was kinda turned off by this card, mainly because the fight was so overpriced. I was wondering why this was a rare, but I came to see its potential usefulness. Exert. You can use Prepared as a combat trick, winning trades and gaining life, and if you use Fight on the second main phase, you get to gain even more, as your card will still be buffed with lifelink. Kinda pricey, but not bad at all. Think of this with a card like Glorybringer. You swing in, exert, kill one of your opponent's creatures, play Prepared to untap it and gain lifelink, not to mention hit in even harder, and the Glorybringer is already up for the next combat. Fight can be used any other time for extra value. Expect it in some kind of exert decks for sure. As for limited, well, you'll only probably use Prepared as a combat trick. Certainly not the best. And to wrap up this video, let's take a look at a couple new rares. Drake Haven, enchantment for 2 generic and an island. Whenever you cycle or discard a card, you may pay 1. If you do, create a 2/2 blue Drake token with flying. So, Izzet Discard is starting to look like a real thing here. A better version of Goblin Slide, if not a little more situational, or you could look at this as, like, the return of Lightning Rift, trading in the 2 damage for a 2/2 flyer. I mean, all I can think about is a grindy blue-red deck with Madness and Hazoret the Fervent at the helm. Just discard everything, make those Drakes, cast from the graveyard, implement Madness, it all looks to be super strong right now. This enchantment may be a little slow, but honestly, at 3 mana to cast and only an extra for every cycle or Madness card, getting a 2/2 flyer is pretty sweet. Expect this to be at the very least experimented with in Standard. As for Limited, it's a lot harder to say. You get the discard and cycles you need, then sure, maybe, but most of the time I'll be staying away from this card. Just a tad too situational for limited play. And lastly, my personal favorite card thus far from Amonkhet, the Return of Tokens. In blue-white? Okay. Temmet, Vizier of Naktamun. 2/2 legendary human cleric for 1 plains and 1 island. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature token you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. Holy wow, guys. Tokens are back in it. Well, almost, and this card certainly helps in that. It's a 2/2 body for 2, which is decent, but it also buffs one of your tokens and allows it to smash in. Exactly what you need in a token deck, especially one that operates off Emblem rather than the traditional 1/1s. Speaking of Embalm, the Master Embalmer has Embalm himself. For 3 generic and a plains and an island, you can exile him from the graveyard and make a zombie copy of him. At that point, he can then buff and make himself unblockable. So tokens are looking to be a real thing in Amonkhet, both with the stronger Embalm creatures and traditional 1/1s. I'm sure you'll have to do a mix and match of both to make this a successful deck, but if blue-white are the colors preferred in this deck, which looks to me to be the case, how about adding some cycle cards and Drake Haven? That's a good bit of Drakes you could buff. Anyway guys, that's all the spoilers I have for you today. Let me know what you think about them in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video and want to support the Aether Hub here on YouTube, make sure you leave the video a like and subscribe for more awesome MTG content. As always guys, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time here on the Aether Hub.